So the last piece within this designing beyond a room section that we're talking about is when you have smaller spaces within a large space, and really focusing on enclosed spaces within this. Okay. So we've been talking a lot about how do you create zones or spaces without enclosing it, but there are times when you do need to enclose it. So here's an example of, again, a very historic architectural layout where they have a large primary space and then smaller secondary enclosed spaces along it. Um, it's a very simple arrangement. It's also very formal when it's laid out like this, where it runs around the perimeter. So if you as you've seen it. What you want to kind of think of when you are doing this is think in terms of clusters of rooms. So, what this does is it allows you to reduce the amount of corridors and hallway space, and makes for an easier flow throughout the space. It also allows you to quickly lay out a space because you can create larger groups of items that you're working with instead of, 30 smaller rooms that you're trying to figure out. Um, you can use rooms of the same size, and I'm going to show you some examples too. So if you had six offices that were the exact same size, you could group them together, kind of two rows of three back to back, and make one larger block that you're dealing with. Lots of times, rooms will often occur in rows along the perimeter or sometimes in the center of the space. Um, and then those interior spaces, like we said, are grouped to create a large space. It does not have to be rooms of the same size, like the office example I just gave. It can be different sizes that fit together, and we'll look at what that looks like. So, and a lot of that comes from just playing with things as you go through it. You also want to understand the hierarchy of rooms. So, for example, the first space you walk into is what's most important. In an office building, it's usually going to be the receptionist. And then from there, lots of times it may be a large conference room where visitors are entertained. So that's going to be towards the front and grouped close to the receptionist. Whereas your coffee room, your copy room, that might be placed further away. Um, so here's some examples. So we'll start with just kind of the clusters before we look at the layout. So this is an example of things that are grouped similar sizes. So these are probably all offices is what it looks like. This could be a perimeter row along, like this could be windows on the outside space and then a hallway. And then you have a group of interior offices as you go through. Okay. This, when I first started designing in office spaces, this was very common. So these offices would have windows, they were the better offices. These had no windows, they were very dark, um, and just not fun to be in. But it is a very efficient use of space. Over here, these are some examples of what you can do when you have unequal sizes. So you can start with, again, one or two things. This is very similar to building off of that fireplace, but you're working with rooms instead of smaller cabinets, fireplaces, etc. So this might be, a larger conference room. Maybe these are two offices next to it. This might move again into a larger meeting room. This may be small phone rooms next to it. And then maybe it's closet storage space along here. All right, same thing here. It looks like a large meeting room here, probably offices off the side. And then they filled in with two smaller meeting spaces here. Um, as you do this to fill this in, these meeting spaces may not need to be as deep as what they're shown, but it's okay to add a foot or two to make them match up with the outer spaces. Um, and it works rather than having them set back and just make it awkward. All right, so looking at this overall floor plan kind of gives you an idea of several things going on and ways you can pull it together and what it looks like. So let's start with the easiest piece, which are the perimeter offices. So you've got rows, and again, you see these are all brought out to the same depth. Even this one where it juts out, they come to that same side, same length into the corridor. So what that does is that keeps your corridor nice and smooth as it goes along. This also helps with framing so that they're built just framing one wall instead of going in and out with that. Um, Same thing on this side. It's just kind of repeated on again the exterior. You have this is an atrium space. So in a way, these function as also perimeter spaces, and you see that they've got these running in a row along here. And again, they're all at the same depth. Okay, in this center here is where they've taken lots of different size spaces and put them in together into one block that is much easier to work with for your corridors. So you've got the center area. This is probably the reception, the entry space. This is kind of that grand entrance. Um, and then off there's corridors off of either side of it that leads to, this may again be a meeting room, this could be storage. You have your stairwells here, so they've incorporated that into there. And then on the other side of this oval space, looks like you have an elevator, some more stairwells here, and then another smaller, could be meeting room or an office here. But all of those are put together for one large space. And again, what that does when we cluster it, one, it makes it much easier to design larger groups as you're placing them rather than thinking through all these individual spaces. And it's also allowing you to have nice, clean corridors, and it makes it much easier for framing, which will cut down on your cost as you go forward.